The Good Morning America studio was already tense before the cameras turned on. Not chaotic, not loud, just tense in the way that happens when everyone in the room knows something might go wrong, and no one's sure who will pull the trigger. Sylvester Stallone was scheduled to appear on the show to discuss his latest film project and reflect on his legendary career spanning 5 decades in Hollywood. It had been pitched as a nostalgic conversation about his iconic characters, his journey from struggling actor to global superstar, and his thoughts on the current state of cinema. But that was just the version the public saw. Behind the scenes, there were emails, conditions, and warnings. Stallone's team had been very specific about keeping the conversation focused on his artistic legacy and avoiding political controversies. Good Morning America's producers had agreed, or at least they said they had. But just minutes before they walked onto the set, one of the producers whispered something to George Stephanopoulos about pressing him on his conservative politics and challenging his support for controversial figures. And George's entire approach shifted. The atmosphere in the studio carried the familiar energy of morning television, mixed with an undercurrent of anticipation that suggested something more significant was brewing. The GMA set, usually designed to feel comfortable and welcoming for celebrity interviews, felt different today, more like a courtroom than a place for friendly conversation. The lighting had been adjusted to capture every expression, every moment of what could become either a celebratory interview or a complete disaster. When Stallone finally stepped onto the set, the applause from the studio audience was immediate and enthusiastic. They knew they were in the presence of cinematic royalty, the man who had created Rocky and Rambo, who had embodied the American dream on screen for generations. Stallone wore a perfectly tailored dark suit that couldn't quite hide his still impressive physique at 77 years old. His face, weathered by decades but still carrying that distinctive intensity, broke into his famous crooked smile as he waved to the audience. Robin Roberts provided the warm introduction that GMA was known for. She said, "We're thrilled to have the legendary Sylvester Stallone with us this morning. Sly, it's always wonderful to see you." Stallone's smile was genuine, his voice carrying that distinctive rasp that had become iconic. He said, "Thanks for having me, Robin. Always good to be here, you know? Still fighting the good fight after all these years." The comment drew warm laughter from the audience, and for a moment, it seemed like the interview would proceed as planned. Robin continued enthusiastically. She said, "Your new film is getting incredible reviews. After all these years, what keeps you motivated to keep creating?" Stallone leaned forward with obvious passion. He said, "You know, Robin, it's about telling stories that matter. Stories about people who don't give up, who keep fighting even when the odds are against them. That's what America is about, you know? That's what Rocky was about. The idea that anyone can make it if they work hard enough." George immediately inserted himself into the conversation, his tone already carrying an edge that hadn't been there during pre-interview discussions. He said, "Sly, speaking of America, you've been quite vocal about your political views lately. You've expressed support for some pretty controversial figures. Don't you think celebrities should be more careful about using their platforms politically?" A subtle shift occurred in Stallone's demeanor. His media instincts, developed over decades of interviews, immediately recognized the pivot from his work to politics. He said carefully, "George, I've always believed in speaking my mind. That's what this country is about, freedom of speech, freedom of expression." George pressed forward, his voice taking on the prosecutorial tone that had served him during his political career. He said, "But when you endorse certain political figures, when you make statements that divide rather than unite, aren't you using your influence irresponsibly?" The temperature in the room began to shift. Robin Roberts looked uncomfortable, recognizing that this wasn't the direction the interview was supposed to take. Stallone's relaxed demeanor became more guarded. He said, "Divide? George, I support people who I think will fight for working Americans, for the forgotten men and women who make this country great. How is that divisive?" George leaned forward aggressively. He said, "Come on, Sly. When you support politicians who attack democratic institutions, who spread conspiracy theories, who undermine faith in our electoral system, how is that not divisive?" That's when something fundamental shifted in Stallone's attitude. The suggestion that his political beliefs were somehow anti-American struck at the core of who he was. He said, "Anti-democratic? George, I've spent my entire career celebrating American values, hard work, determination, never giving up. My characters represent the best of what this country can be." His voice began to carry the intensity that had made him legendary on screen. You want to talk about undermining faith? What about the media that constantly attacks half the country for their political beliefs? What about the Hollywood elite who look down on working-class Americans? George's tone became openly confrontational. He said, "But you're part of Hollywood, Sly. You've made hundreds of millions of dollars from the system. Isn't it hypocritical to attack the industry that made you wealthy?" Stallone stood up slowly, his still imposing frame suddenly commanding the small studio space. The movement was controlled but charged with the kind of energy that had made him convincing as an action hero. He said, "Hypocritical? George, let me tell you something about hypocrisy. I came from nothing, absolutely nothing. I slept in bus stations. I sold my dog for $50 because I couldn't afford to feed him." His voice cracked with genuine emotion as he continued. "I wrote Rocky when I was broke, when nobody believed in me, when every studio in Hollywood turned me down. You know what kept me going? The belief that in America, if you work hard enough, if you never give up, you can make something of yourself." The studio was completely silent now, captivated by the raw authenticity of his response. Stallone continued, his voice building with passion. "And now you're sitting here telling me that because I believe in that dream, because I support politicians who fight for that dream, I'm somehow undermining democracy? That's not undermining democracy, George. That's what democracy looks like." George tried to interrupt, clearly recognizing that he had lost control of the interview. He said, "I'm not questioning your success story." "Yes, you are." Stallone's voice filled the studio. "You're questioning everything I stand for. You're suggesting that because I don't agree with your political views, I'm somehow a threat to American institutions." He walked around the interview area, his movement reminiscent of his most powerful screen performances. "You know what threatens American institutions, George? It's people like you who think that anyone who disagrees with the liberal orthodoxy is automatically wrong, automatically dangerous, automatically un-American." The audience was riveted. Several people were clearly moved by the passion and sincerity of his words. George's face was flushing red, his usual composure completely shattered. He said, "I'm trying to have a substantive discussion." "Substantive?" Stallone's laugh was bitter. "George, this isn't substantive. This is an ambush. You brought me here under false pretenses to attack my political beliefs." He faced the cameras directly, speaking to the audience at home rather than to the hostile host. "I want everyone watching to understand something. I didn't become successful by following the crowd, by saying what people wanted to hear, by being politically correct. I became successful by believing in myself, by working harder than everyone else, by never giving up on my dreams." His voice carried the conviction that had made him a global icon. "And I support politicians who believe in that same American dream, who think that success should be earned, not given, who believe that hard work should be rewarded, not punished, who think that Americans should be proud of their country, not ashamed of it." George made one desperate attempt to regain control. He said, "But surely you can see how some of your political statements—" "Some of my statements?" Stallone's voice cracked like thunder. "George, what statements? That I believe in law and order? That I think people should work for what they get? That I love my country and want it to be strong?" He grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair, his movements decisive and final. "You know what? I'm done with this. I came here to talk about movies, about entertainment, about inspiring people to chase their dreams. Instead, I got a political lecture from someone who's never created anything, never built anything, never inspired anyone to be better than they are." As he put on his jacket, he delivered what would become his most quoted statement. "I've spent 50 years entertaining people, giving them heroes to believe in, showing them that the underdog can win if they just keep fighting. And apparently, that makes me dangerous in your world." The studio was dead silent as he walked toward the exit. "Well, let me tell you something, George. The characters I've played, Rocky, Rambo, all of them. They represent the spirit that built this country. The spirit that says you don't have to accept where you started, that you can fight your way to something better. He stopped at the exit and turned back one final time. And if that spirit threatens you, if that message scares you, if those values make you uncomfortable, then maybe you should ask yourself what you really believe about America. His voice carried across the studio with the authority of someone who had inspired millions. To everyone watching who's ever been told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not the right kind of person to succeed, don't listen to them. Keep fighting. Keep working. Keep believing in yourself and in this country. He looked directly at George one final time. And don't let anyone tell you that loving America, working hard, and believing in traditional values makes you the enemy. Because in the real world, the world outside this studio, those are still the values that matter. The studio erupted as Stallone walked out with his head high, leaving George sitting alone at the desk, visibly shaken and humiliated. Robin Roberts tried to salvage the segment, but the energy was completely off. George attempted to make closing comments, but his usual smooth delivery was nowhere to be found. The image of him sitting deflated after being systematically dismantled by Hollywood royalty became instantly iconic. Within minutes, the footage was everywhere. Social media exploded with reactions that transcended typical political lines. Hashtag Stallone Stands Up began trending alongside hashtag Real America and hashtag Hollywood Hypocrisy. From his car, Stallone posted, "Came to talk about movies and the American dream. Got lectured about politics instead. The dream is still alive for anyone willing to fight for it." The response was overwhelming. Working-class Americans who had grown up watching Rocky felt that Stallone had spoken for them. Veterans appreciated his defense of traditional American values. Fellow actors, many privately, expressed support for his refusal to be politically bullied. But perhaps most importantly, the incident sparked conversations about whether celebrities should be required to conform to certain political views to remain acceptable in mainstream media. At a film festival the following week, Stallone was asked about the walk-off. He said simply, "I've never backed down from a fight in my movies, and I'm not going to start in real life. Sometimes you have to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable." The revolution wasn't just in a celebrity defending his political views. It was in exposing how certain media figures had become so politically partisan that they couldn't separate entertainment from ideology. It was in proving that the American dream still resonated with people who had lived it. It was in showing that sometimes the most important fight is for the right to believe in your country without apologizing for it. Sylvester Stallone didn't just walk off Good Morning America that day. He walked away from a culture that demanded conformity from anyone who wanted media access, that required celebrities to apologize for loving their country, that treated traditional American values as somehow dangerous or outdated. He proved that success doesn't require surrendering your principles. And he showed that sometimes the most powerful performance isn't in a movie. It's standing up for what you believe in when everyone expects you to back down. Because that day, Stallone reminded everyone that the American dream isn't a political position. It's a human truth. That hard work matters. That perseverance pays off. That anyone can rise above their circumstances. And that believing in these things doesn't make you a political extremist. It makes you an American. The kind of American who built the country that gave a poor kid from Philadelphia the chance to become Rocky Balboa. The kind of American who still believes that in this country, if you're willing to go the distance, you can achieve anything. Even if it means walking off a television show to defend that belief. Especially then. Because some principles are more important than publicity. Some values are more valuable than validation. And some dreams are worth fighting for. No matter who's in your corner. No matter how many rounds you have to go. The bell had rung. The fight was over. And Rocky was still standing.